Hello everyone and welcome to the first podcast of Miss O'More on Air. So this is a podcast for all students out there who perhaps learn better through listening to stuff. I know myself, I learn better through movement, but some people have come to me and said they learn better through listening. So I thought to start the podcast and we can hopefully learn a bit better that way. So our first chapter today is going to be on the historian and the archaeologist. These are the first two chapters in junior cycle. I always stick them together when teaching, so I thought let's keep the same method and stick them together for the podcast. So this is a nice and easy chapter. A couple of key definitions, but then other than that, it's just the basics for everything else that you're going to learn. Okay, so this is one of the most important questions that you can get asked in the junior because it comes up so often. So without further ado, let's get started. So, what is history? History is the study of the past. We're looking at the story of all human activity, how people lived, what they did for jobs, leisure, their daily life from morning to evening. Because of this, we have two different types of history. We have prehistory, which is before things were written, and then we have the historic period, which is when things were written down. So we need to rely on different sources when looking at these two types of history. Now, the best way that we can define these two types is we have BC, before Christ. A lot of this time is before writing, okay? Then we have AD, which is Anno Domini, which is after death. It's not standing for after death, but it's after the death of Jesus Christ. And this is when writing usually comes in. Now, the Romans is a bit of a tricky one. That is during the BC era, but it's also in the AD. Now, for our sources, we have loads of different types of sources. We have two main categories, and this is primary sources and secondary sources. If you learn nothing else today, this is the most important thing. Primary sources come directly from the past. Okay, this podcast is coming directly from 2024, therefore it is a primary source. If I was to find a coin from ancient Rome, that is a primary source. Secondary sources come later. So your history book is a secondary source. A movie or a documentary is a secondary source. Then we move into the 5 subcategories of sources. So we have written, so something that has been written down. Visual, something we can see. Oral, something that is spoken, like this podcast. Tactile, which is something that we can touch. And aural, which is something we listen to. Now, a lot of people get confused between oral and aural. So if you think of it that you speak your oral for the junior and you listen for your aural. So when we're looking at these sources, we need to ask 4 questions. And these are questions that you will get asked when looking at sources in your exam. Is it biased? Is it accurate? Is it exaggerated? And is it propaganda? Now, the archaeologist. The archaeologist is a lovely chapter because it is studying physical things left behind by people in the past. So, you're going to need to look at different climates. There's 2 main climates for preserving stuff. The first one is hot. So if you think of ancient Egypt and the mummies, all of the bodies have been preserved really well because all the moisture has been drained out. The second is a wet climate like Ireland. And if you think of the bog bodies, which you can find online, pictures of them up in Trinity College in Dublin, these are bodies that were saturated with so much moisture that they were able to remain somewhat similar to how they were when they died. So these are the best climates to find stuff in relating to bodies, because obviously bodies decay. Now, how archaeologists find this type of stuff, if you think of Ross from Friends and all the stuff that he did, well, they would use diggers to dig up the topsoil to make sure that they can get down to the level of where stuff is, because the deeper you go, the older it is. They would use trowels then as they get closer, so a smaller shovel, brushes and sieves to make sure that they get any tiny little fragments of bones or chips of plates and pots, coins. They would x-ray the ground to make sure that they're close to what they need. And they can use drones as well, which is a much more modern way of looking at things. When they get all these artifacts, they need to then date things. Now, for dating, you need to know at least 2 of these, okay? This is really important. I've seen people get caught out because they only learn 1. You need to learn 2. So the first one is coins. Coins have dates on them. That is really easy. You don't need to learn that, okay? It's the next 3 that you need to learn. At least 2 of them. If you can learn all 3, that would be preferable, okay? So the first one is stratigraphy. This is the deeper it is, the older it is. So if you find something close to the surface, it means it's not that old. It's maybe 100 years old. But if you were to find something 100 meters down in the ground, it could be possibly thousands of years old. The next one is carbon dating or radiocarbon dating. And this is when things die, living things, all of the carbon that's in the body gets released and it stains the ground. So you're able to see that something was there originally, whether it was a plant, an animal, a human. This is how we can tell that something was there and the shape would remain the same within the soil. Now the last one, which I think personally everyone should learn, it's the best one, is dendrochronology. Now I can't pronounce that right to save the life of me, but what it means is we use the rings of trees in the wood to learn more about how old things are. So if we had a wooden house, we would look at the wooden post and we would see how many rings there are. 1 ring is 1 year. So if there's 100 rings, we know that this house is now 100 years old. But trees also tell us so much more. If you have a thick ring within the tree trunk, that means that that year there was a lot of rain, there was good amount of moisture, good harvesting, and this allows us to know that this would have been a good year for crops and such. Now, if the ring is a lot thinner, that means that it wasn't as good of a year. It means that there wasn't as much rain, that it wouldn't have been a good harvest. So if you think of the famine, the rings would have been really thin, whereas perhaps maybe like 100 years beforehand, the rings might be a bit thicker. So there you have it, guys. The first 2 chapters done in less than 8 minutes. Please let me know if this was helpful, and hopefully I will see you again in the next podcast. Bye.